And we're live. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Lulu Freistat, and I'm the Executive Director of Smart Elections.
And I am Benny Smith, and I'm a Shelby County Election Commissioner and technical advisor for Smart Elections. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Benny's an all-around good sport with Smart Elections. We call on him in all kinds of things like, explain this to us.
I wear a few hats.
He's a software developer and really knows his way around elections and electronics, and is also kind of a genius. So we're always glad that he's with us. And tonight we have a really fascinating program for you. We have a guest. His name is Tracy Campbell. He's a professor at the University of Kentucky, a historian, a Pulitzer Prize nominee, the author of 5 books, one of which is probably my all-time favorite book on the planet. It's called Deliver the Vote. And it is, I have my weathered copy here. I have actually on this forum read sections of this book to people. Wow. The subtitle of this book, A History of Election Fraud and American Political Tradition, 1742 to 2004. So we are really delighted to have him as a guest. And we'll just do a little bit of information about us so you know who we are. You have our names and our tags there if you want to follow us on Twitter. And Smart Elections is the name of our project. We are a nonpartisan project. We are dedicated to elevating election reform to an urgent national priority, which we profoundly believe it needs to be in order for the real transformative changes to happen that need to happen for us to really come together as a country and take on the hard challenges that face us. We cannot do that if we cannot get our act together with our democracy. If you want to know more about us, you can go to our website, smartelections.us. If you want to reach us, we love to get your input, contact at smartelections.us. We have one viewer, Ruth, who always emails me after the show with input and comments. We'd love, if you love the show, send us your positive input there. We love to have that, and we often put it in the newsletters. And if you have criticisms, want to help us improve, we pay attention to those. Actually, we have definitely made modifications based on input that we get from you. And so we're going to just jump right into it because we've just got so much to cover. This is a thick book full of really, really deep, profound content. And I'm really excited to introduce Dr. Campbell to you. And we're going to put him in the hot seat. I know, are you feeling hot?
Hot box.
Is it warmer there?
All of a sudden, yeah.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me, Lulu. Good to be with you and Benny, and I look forward to the next hour.
Awesome. Okay. So I think the way that we want to get started is I was going through the book and taking a fair number of notes on it. And one of the things that just struck me is the absolute breadth and depth of election fraud and abuse. And I made some notes. I made one list that is just the locations, not all of the locations, but some of the locations that are listed in your book. And I'm going to go ahead and share those right now. Let's see. This is here's the document that I have with the locations. And I think it speaks wonders. Let's see. Let's get into this tab. So I think you're probably seeing that document now. And I'm just going to kind of roll down this document and read some of these. These are just some of the locations that are covered in the book where election fraud is documented in detail, in really rather frightening detail sometimes. Kansas, San Francisco, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Washington, D.C., Baltimore. Professor Campbell describes how the Massachusetts Constitution was probably actually never ratified because the vote that said that it was ratified was actually fraudulent. Chicago, New York, so many pages on New York, Tammany Hall, and afterwards, Arkansas, Mississippi, Indiana, which was called venal Indiana, West Virginia, Alabama, Louisiana. I know I have one quote. Louisiana had become the head center of ballot box stuffing. That was page 103. Wilmington, the riots there. Louisville, Kentucky, so much fraud in Louisville. North Carolina, Rhode Island, a state for sale. The bribery of voters with cash at the polls. Adams County, Ohio, Terre Haute, Indiana. Wholesale fraud in Pennsylvania, Iowa, Texas, Georgia, Florida, South Carolina, Missouri, and lest we forget the 10 states that did not actually list Lincoln on the ballot in the election before the Civil War, which I have to say, I never even thought about it, but of course they didn't have Lincoln on the ballot. Lincoln won that election without even being on the ballot, right?
Wow.
Yep.
A true landslide.
Well, I went into this kind of naive, quite frankly, because I thought politics was a rough and tumble sport that ended on the morning of election day, and we all just kind of stopped and waited for this objective thing to happen, and the results would come in, and we move on from there. And so I started writing a book, even before this one, Lulu, about a new dealer who was working for Franklin Roosevelt when he was in his early 20s and was seen as a possible senator or governor, who in 1948 stuffed a ballot box and goes to prison. And so I started interviewing people with this question of how could he do something so outrageous and so inexplicable? And I had enough, I'll call them political figures, just kind of look at me and say, you're asking the wrong question. It's not why was he doing it, it's why did he get caught? And you need to kind of recalibrate and reframe your whole understanding. And so when I finished that book, I'd also read Robert Caro's book on Lyndon Johnson, Means of Ascent, and how the 48 election played out in excruciating detail. And so I thought, how about a short book on election mechanics, say, since World War II? And the problem with being a historian is that once you start going down that mine shaft, you don't know how deep it goes. And when do you stop at some arbitrary moment? And it just kept going and going and going. And so when you showed me that list, it brought back all these memories of, yeah, okay, I remember that one. Yeah, that one came up as well. And it was a story that I, quite frankly, it really brought me into some dark spots because it was not fun material to be researching, particularly the violence, just the outright abuse of people who felt like, what's the point? Will it be counted? Am I going to be safe when I go to the polls? Will it be respected when we're finished? In other ways, a lot of us felt, 2 months ago during the insurrection, wondering what happened to that election, that people would be willing to just kind of overturn it simply because they don't like the results. Well, that's another kind of tradition, unfortunately, that we've had way too many examples of.
Right, and it's always a balance. One of the things that you talk about in the book is sometimes the courts have been willing to intervene, but often they have not. And you actually talk about courageous court decisions where the courts did step in and completely invalidate the vote, order a new election, but it's very rare. And I really had the feeling that you were longing for more oversight, more guidance from our structure.
Well, exactly. But who does that? Who is the referee in this game? And in the United States, it has often fallen to the courts to serve that. And it kind of did that after 2020, and a number of courts who just completely ignored, dismissed the cases of fraud against the Biden campaign and calling them risible, which
the claims against the Biden campaign.
Well, right.
Against his candidacy.
The Trump claims.
That the Trumpites were saying had invalidated the election, right? So in a lot of cases, our court systems, whether they're federal judges or local judges, Sometimes the Supreme Court act as that kind of referee at the end, but that's a tenuous situation as well. And we've had commissions like after the 1876 election. That didn't impress anyone. So it's like a basketball game where we're looking for who will wear those striped shirts, who will make the call without, without either team in their corner. And we respect that. And that is the tough issue in a two-party system like this.
Right. I mean, one of the things that we've been asking really for quite a while now is, can we move to a system like they have in Australia, where they have a neutral election commission, and it's really part of the employment. If you're going to work for the election commission, they demand neutrality, and it's respected apparently, and really people are very serious about it.
Yeah.
So I think that might be something that would be difficult, but we did import the secret ballot from Australia, and maybe there's other things that we can learn from them there. I want to just move on a little bit, and people are asking in the chat where they can purchase the book. I believe it is on Amazon, Packy, and I also found it on Goodreads. I put the link in the into the newsletter that I sent out for people, but here's a link on Goodreads on how to get this book. I can't recommend it highly enough. It's just, for one thing, fascinating. I really found it a page turner. So I definitely encourage you to grab that. I want to talk a little bit, we've talked about how it's really hard to be a referee in the situation because everyone is so partisan. And I want to just move into the issue of race, and how, whether we were starting, way back when it was really between, say, Germans and Italians, or as it became much more ingrained, the effort to keep people of color from voting. Race has always been at the center of a lot of this election fraud, and some of it is really ugly. I'm going to read a few quotes from, I want to read, let's see. I'm going to read a couple quotes that talk about just how overwhelming this, how dominant this was in our process. And I'm going to pull this up also. Let's see. These are some of the quotes that I just pulled from the book, and I'll read some of these. Fraud had routinely occurred in elections ranging from local sheriff to the presidency. Corruption dominated the ballot box. The people are demoralized. Election fraud was a necessary tool in the white supremacist battle, one that was deeply ingrained in the very fabric of the nation. And maybe that's one that will when we're going to talk about race now. Just a couple others. Fraud had been a part of the American Republic from the very beginning, and its more recent manifestations, as bad as they were symptomatic of the culture deeply embedded in American politics. And I mean, maybe we can just spend a minute or two on that, and just how really ingrained this seems to be, just really part of the process, and how I think for me, how surprising that is, how it's not taught. When you're in school, they teach you elections are, fireworks and democracy, and we do it right. And yet the reality is so different.
I wonder if they're going to do that after January 6th. Really?
Yeah, you think
that they teach that? I don't know. I don't know if I can do 2 minutes on race, because it's like the water in the ocean. It's everywhere. And there are a number of serious scholars who are saying that we really haven't had a functioning democracy until 1965 and the Voting Rights Act. And that before that, it was something of a pseudo-democracy, but still large segments kicked out of the system. I'll give you just one example. I've spent the last 10 years working on a book about 1942, and I thought, I'll get past all this, because that's when we came together, right? That's when the greatest generation, thought about defending the country against something bigger. And they did until it came to race. And so there was this bill before Congress in September of 42. Should we allow soldiers to vote who are in the Pacific or being shipped to Europe to vote? And that seems like the easiest answer in the world, right? The problem was that there was language inserted into that bill that would get rid of the poll tax. And that's when a number of Southern senators said, not on your life are we going to allow that to happen, because what you would do is introduce the whole idea of Black equality, and we're not going to stand for that. And so in November, the same month that the first troops land in North Africa, we've got a filibuster in the Senate. They're ready to stop the whole process of the idea of allowing Blacks to vote through the ending of the poll tax. And that's at a moment of, of a national crisis that, we can experience now with the pandemic, thinking that we're coming together, but because of race, voting, and what that would open up, produced a backlash that I wasn't expecting. So it's kind of like anytime you get involved in thinking about politics and political power, these kinds of issues come up. And if you don't boil it down to race, and it can be a lot of other races. I think you mentioned that, Lulu. In the mid-1800s, the Know-Nothings, and that's become much more relevant today. The Know-Nothing Party, which was a xenophobic, anti-immigrant party, and their targets were mostly Irish Americans and German Americans, and thought they aren't real Americans, and what they'll do at the ballot box would be outrageous. So we've got to use whatever means necessary, whether it's dumping ballots in the river or using violence, to make sure that we cleanse the system. So in the name of stopping fraud, of purifying the system, we see this party that they weren't very public, but they would say, when asked about it, just say, nothing, but where real Americanism lies. And that kind of nativism, which we have seen, rise up again, has roots going back well before the Civil War.
Benny, do you want to comment on this at all?
Yeah, sure. My study came just being a Black American, one to understand like litmus tests and a lot of the suppression efforts that happen in the southern states to keep Black people from voting. It was, guess how many jelly beans are in the jar, and if you don't get the right number, you're not competent to vote. So, did your research cover some of those tactics that I just learned as a layperson, just trying to understand the history?
Well, it would be, you're right, there'd be literacy tests in which sometimes the white people administering those tests couldn't read. And we would have Black doctors or dentists who would not pass the test. But it wasn't a real test. It was just a disfranchisement way to just kind of check a box. Or the poll tax, which would, it was like $1 for each time you voted. But if the average income, say in the state of Mississippi in 1900s, $50 a year, that's an overwhelming tax, right?
Right.
It's shocking to a lot of people. We didn't get rid of the poll tax until the 1960s. I mean, that's why I keep going back to when our democracy kind of became a more of a functioning, full-throated democracy, even with a lot of issues at hand, wasn't until the mid-60s, 1960, not 1860s.
Mm-hmm.
I think that people also do not realize how incredibly violent the elections were in the South. And this is something that I really learned specifically from your book, despite the fact that I knew about lynchings and I knew about the Ku Klux Klan, how this was so specifically associated with elections. And these are some of the stats from the book. This was just in one page, actually. Most of this was on one page from the election of 1868. In Bossier Parish, this is Louisiana, riots killed 162 people. Those were people of color. In Cato Parish, estimates of the number of African Americans murdered during the 1868 election ranged from 185 to 300. That's in one parish, in one election. People killed. And in the 6 months preceding the election, over 1,000 African Americans were killed in Louisiana. And in that same period, Democrats, who were the party that were suppressing the Black vote at that time, their vote totals more than doubled. And then it was so clear in the turnout figures. You saw Black turnout after the Civil War at 70 to 90%. And then within, I think it was really just a few years, maybe 10 years, it had gone to almost zero, where you would have one predominantly like Republican African American precinct with only maybe 2 votes. And so just the level of violence was really grisly about how this was enforced. And I have a quote even that I wanted to put up that it was so blatant, it was so understood. This is a member of the White League. It has been charged that the white man's party intends to achieve success by intimidation. This is strictly true. And the types of techniques that were used, from actually digging a grave next to the polling location, or having tubs of water where they would dunk people's heads. That was in DC, I think. An incident where a group that was really armed and trying to take over the election actually went and got a cannon and brought a cannon. So these were very violent efforts to suppress the Black vote.
Yeah, I don't do the numbers for my students because they kind of glaze over. Instead, I show this clip from Birth of a Nation, the first full-length motion picture done in 1915. And there's this notion, and it's about Reconstruction. It's about what happens after the war. And there's this scene, you can probably YouTube it, where the Klan pulls up in front of a number of Black houses on Election Day with their guns. And people come out expecting the vote, see the violence, they go back in the house. Order has been restored. Goodness and mercy have been, returned. And when the Klan marches back, the women greet them, as heroes, as rock stars, because of what they've done to save democracy from this outrageous, effect of Blacks, former slaves voting. The violence, that was one of the things, like I said, whether you're looking at your family history, your communities or neighborhoods history, or your countries, once you start down that shaft and you start looking at evidence and allowing the evidence to take you where it takes you, you better be ready for it.
Right.
And I wasn't.
Look, our election commission building our local election commission building is named after James Meredith. James Meredith was the first Black person to attend Ole Miss, but he was shot trying to register people to vote. They shot him and he survived it. And I think he came back to register somewhere around 4,000 people to vote in Mississippi. And we just named our election commission building after him. I think 2 years ago, when I first got on the commission, we named the election commission building after him.
And you're Memphis, right?
Yep, Memphis.
Well, wasn't that Boss Crump?
Yes, it was. Yes. If you know Boss Crump, you know the politics in Memphis. Yes.
Yeah, there you go. Each city would have someone like that.
Yeah, Boss Crump was yes.
Yeah.
And I do want to clarify, people in the chat, and this is definitely true. Ruth is saying, let's clarify that at the time in Louisiana, Democrats were Dixiecrats. At that time, during the Civil War and after the Civil War, the Democrats were the party that was trying to suppress the Black vote. And I have to say, much the same way that the Republican Party seems to be trying to suppress the Black vote today, although much more violently at that time. And Bruce is adding in there, the Republicans were different then too. Yeah, the parties do seem to have kind of swapped places, and it is important to say that. But let's move on and talk about reform.
Can I make a point to
Yes,
Ruth?
of course.
There is a famous speech by Malcolm X. I grew up listening to Malcolm X, and he had a speech, and it was called the Dixiecrats. You guys should go and find it, because he was saying a Dixiecrat ain't nothing but a Democrat. So he was exactly calling out that very thing in his speech.
Yeah. And
okay, then I get to do my Dixiecrat story too now. Now,
please, that's what you're here for. So tell us these stories.
Well, the Dixiecrats were a party in the 1948 election led by Strom Thurmond.
Yep.
Who had left the Democratic Party. And when I teach about the Dixiecrats and Strom Thurmond, I can't play a lot of the YouTubes because the language, and it's mostly about swimming pools. I mean, in 1948, you think it's about the Cold War. It's about the direction of the country. And Strom Thurmond was about, integrated swimming pools and what that would do to the fabric of the country. He won. I lost track I think 4 states, if not 5, in that election. And so the Dixiecrats of the late 40s and early 50s are not to be ignored as some crank party. They understood the power of race and the power of white supremacy and used it to win electoral votes, which in a two-party system is mighty hard to do.
Yeah, yeah, we lost you there for a second, Benny.
Yeah.
So I think this is probably a good time to just, I think I did our list of locations, but I did want to pull up our list of methods. I didn't do the methods yet, right? So let's, and again, this is something that just, I was going through the book and just, I realized it was just so many different ways that were creative for affecting the outcome of the election. I just started to be stunned at, I think, literally the creativity involved. So here's some of these. I wrote this list, and I think you can, yeah, you can see some of these now. I put some of them in highlight. So this includes, let's see, I need to close out one of these. Yeah, you're still seeing that. Okay, great. So some of the techniques to influence elections that Dr. Campbell lists: repeat voting. So it just went on and on, but one example, 8 men registered 161 times in one day. I believe that was in New York. Stealing the ballot box, a really popular activity. This was in San Francisco. There was a sliding door in the ballot box that you could just slide open and then stuff as many ballots as you wanted in there. Lots of violence, pistols, revolvers, brickbats. I talked about the cannon. The inventing the towns, one of my favorite ones, where they literally made up the town of Springbridge, and they made up the town of it was Springbridge or Spring Creek and another creek, Bridge Creek,
Yeah.
and they were just fictitious towns that they used to create voters. And then when they when they found that fraud, it was because they had taken one piece of paper and torn it in half. And the results of one town were on the top piece of paper, and the results of the other town were on the bottom piece of paper. So they realized that it was fraudulent because the two towns results were on the same piece of paper.
Yeah. My favorite was Louisville, which had a moving train car in which the polling booth would be on there. And anytime that the boss of that city, like a boss Crump, his name was Whalen, John Whalen, would see too many black folks ready to vote because they would be voting Republican in 1905, he just moved the train car 5 miles down the road and they'd have to run after it. Wow. And then one day, when he didn't like how the votes were going, because he goes into the box and starts counting them in the middle of the election, he doesn't like it, so he just shuts it down and says, what we're going to do is start a door-to-door canvass, and we're going to knock on everyone's door and say, who do you want to vote for? And that ensured that he won.
Wow. We're going to just, and just some of these others that are just so incredibly creative. We've talked about some of the violent ones. This is one of my favorite ones: telegraphing the Bible to prevent election results from coming through. Not including the candidate's name on the ballot, classic. Candidate winning who was not on the ballot, threatening to fire people from their jobs, withholding land, arresting voters, poll taxes. Something called repeaters that you talk about a lot, which is just people who voted and voted and voted and voted and voted. Police intimidation, huge part that the police played in all of this, where $2,000 would be money would be set aside to hire like 2,000 policemen to make sure that the fraud was enforced. Drugging opponents to steal their registration lists. The vote buying also, the price going up from early in the book from around $2 to vote to later in the book, it went up to about $200 per vote. And I think that's one that is actually really, really important to talk about, because you imply in the book that that one of the reasons that elections are so expensive is all of this cash that's needed to buy votes.
Well, that was certainly the case in local elections. I ended that book in 2004, and I didn't anticipate, Citizens United. And, the kind of cash I was thinking of at that time exploding to the amount of money that's now being used today. The kind of willful misinformation that, we knew about, say, Nixon's dirty tricks campaign, but the kind of willful misinformation that is out there in streams, and then of course foreign influence, I didn't anticipate any of that. So that's kind of the problem with writing history and thinking about the future, is you don't know where we're going. And if you'd asked me 10 years ago, is January 6th capable? Could that happen in the United States? I would have, pure as the driven snow, even after having studied all this, would have said no. Wow. That won't happen here. That maybe at a local election, maybe a statewide, but certainly not a national thing. They won't be storming the Capitol. And here we are in 2021. And my state, Kentucky, had an assassinated governor, troops in the street, 2 state capitals, the kind of bitterness that then raged for decades. But in 1900, and I show students troops with cannon in the middle of a city trying to enforce peace after an election. And I think we kind of naively thought, well, that's something in the past. And I'm still struggling thinking about how I'm going to teach about January 6th.
Dr. Kesar is already doing a course on it. So I'm sure he'll share notes with you. He
wrote, as you know, a foundational book. And my favorite part of the title is the subtitle about the contested history. This whole idea of democracy as a contest. It's been at the center of who we've been from the very beginning. And it's not some linear, always progressing line. It can also be withdrawn. It's a very fragile thing, as we now know. And that's why we need people like you two to be helping us strengthen that very fragile foundation.
Yeah, I think there's some tenets in the civil rights era that people didn't really see the breadth of. I used to watch Eyes on the Prize as a kid. I can never get out of my head George Wallace's, in his inaugural address, he's saying segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. And for some reason, we thought policies weren't going to come out of this guy that had anything to do with segregation. It's just not realistic to think that these people didn't have intentions to keep things the way that they were.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And we're still struggling with that now. So we're going to take a break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about some of the current reforms that are on the table to try to deal with this. We've got people in the comments. I'm talking in particular about HR 1, and that definitely is something that we want to talk about. So like, here's a comment that we've got: registering people illegally. That will happen a lot with HR 1. So we want to talk about that. Smart Elections is supporting HR 1. There are definitely some provisions in there that are really going to help even the playing field with some of this, some of these provisions that we've talked about historically that have really prevented people of color from voting. But we need to look at it realistically and see what parts of the bill could be concerning. So we're going to take a break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about HR 1, women's suffrage, and electronic voting, and what now? What are we going to do with this information that we have that's going to make us the reformers that really finally get to free and fair elections in the United States?
We're going to have a series with Tracy.
That's always been my dream.
I think it's going to be a series. It's just a lot of impact in a lot of this.
I have had a dream about having an ongoing series with you, Professor Campbell, but I know you're very, very busy. He's actually on to all new things. He's got a new book called, it's called The Year of Peril. Have I got that right?
Yep.
Right. And so we'll definitely put the link to that in the chat.
And people in the comments saying your book is $650.
I'll talk about that. I'll talk about that. I'll also talk about George Wallace if I can.
Okay.
Okay. So when we come back, I'm sure we're going to be able to find a way for people to get your book affordably. I have no doubt that we'll be able to do that. And we'll talk about that. So join us, stay with us, go call your friends, tell them this is really fascinating for them, and get on here. We'll be back with Dr. Campbell shortly. Okay, so we got to do some stuff here. Talk to you about what's
volunteering.
What?
Volunteering.
volunteering. This episode of our Smart Elections Break is devoted to volunteering. And as you know, during this section, we try to get you involved and we tell you what you can do to really support this work, which we all feel passionately about. So one of the things that we talk about is the way that you can help us on like social media, things like "you are our PR machine," which is the truth, and to please join our team. And we've made a chart actually to help you do this. And I'm hoping that some of you are going to sign up in this chart. Now, Benny was laughing at me because the chart that I've made is absolutely clear demonstration that I'm probably not the person who should be involved in the social media team.
It's not an infographic.
Well, it's not an infographic. That is absolutely true. What I have made is clearly demonstrates that I am Asperger's and that I
it does.
It's
an okay spreadsheet.
It's an okay spreadsheet. It's a little detailed for social media, but when you, our audience, come forward and someone out there says, I am the perfect person to lead the Smart Election social media team, you will be able to make a much better chart for us. But this is what we have for right now. And I'm going to put the link in the chat. And it's actually, although it looks like a lot of information, it's actually a super easy spreadsheet to navigate. It's very, very straightforward. And basically, it just has days of the week, like Monday through like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And it has time slots, 7 a.m. for the early risers, all the way through 11 p.m. for the late sleep, the ones who stay up all night. And we have one volunteer, Leanda Ludwig, yay for Leanda Ludwig, who has bravely started to sign up. And she has agreed to literally all she's doing. It's like literally a 5-minute commitment. Once a week, you commit to going on social media and finding one of our channels. We're on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and TikTok, and you can just literally find one of our posts and share it, or go on Facebook and make a comment. It turns out it takes about 7 comments on a Facebook post for it to actually pick up speed for the algorithm. So literally, if you go on the Smart Elections Facebook page and find our next forum, which is going to be on April 6th, and say, hey, I'm really looking forward to attending this, can't wait, that is one comment. And then if you get 1 or 2 of your friends to do it, or other people in the chart sign up to do it too, we're on our way and we're starting to get more traction. And the whole point of this is it's not a popularity contest. It's just about getting this information out. You find it fascinating. We find it fascinating. We know it's really important. If we don't get this information out to people, then we won't be able to, really get to the tipping point that we need to get to in order to really get traction, in order to get things done. And we're already so much further than we were. We get, I would say on average, about 500 people watching the forums each week, between watching live and then watching later. Sometimes we get thousands of people on certain forums. We've had up to 3,000 people or more watch a forum. So the more that you participate and help us out, sign on to that spreadsheet and say, yeah, I'm on Facebook anyway. You're on Facebook in the morning. So once a week, go ahead and we'll make sure to have fun content, interesting content, fascinating content on there for you. Maybe quotes from Dr. Campbell's book or other things.
A lot of those.
We know that you're really going to be interested in. So please do go ahead and join us there. And we do also very much welcome donations. We are trying to pay our bills and we really do need money. If you could please go ahead and think big. Can't win if you don't play. Right. If you could make a donation anywhere from $5 to $10,000, we would welcome any size donation. We really do need your help. We are fundraising. We do need to raise our money to get through this year and to scale up the way we're trying to. We'd like you to become a tax-deductible monthly subscriber if you can. And we'd also like you to think about who who can help us out. If you know of grants, foundations, or other people who want to support this work, we believe passionately in this work, and we know that you do too. We're doing work that no other organization is doing. No other organization is doing the kind of education, public oversight, and actual helping with legislation, actually writing good legislation for election security. No other organization is doing all of that at the same time. And why do we need your help? We need your help to continue. We need your help to do this work. So please do support us. Anything else, Benny?
No, I just would just add that the amount of content that we are delivering, the consistency, the domain experts that are just coming to you guys every 2 weeks, you have something to look forward to. That's slowly unpeeling this onion, because another election will come, and there will be another contested election. And from this book, and it stops at 2004. There's a lot of history that hasn't been written either.
Yeah, we're really trying to dig deep and really bring you honest, nonpartisan coverage. I think that's one of the other things about this organization, is that we are not partisan. And because of that, we're able to really, I think, be a little bit more.
We're free to be the adults in the room.
Yeah, we're free to really tell you what's on our minds, tell you what we really think. And so we appreciate your support. I do want to also let you know that one of the things we're working on in New York is we are fighting the Express Vote XL. That is a ballot marking device that is known as a hybrid or all-in-one with a shared paper path. It is a very, very flawed design that security experts all over the country have said is very, very risky. Rich DeMillo, one of the top security experts in the country, has said that it poses extraordinary risks to voters. That was the language that he used. And we are fighting specifically certification of that voting machine in New York. If you are in New York, we would please like for you to come to our Friday meetings. They are at noon, and you can sign up for those on our website, smartelections.us. Has the link there. We specifically have legislation that we co-authored and that we are trying to get passed as soon as possible. Very urgent situation there, because as soon as that machine gets certified, it will go into use probably all over New York City. It could happen within a year. So it's a very urgent situation that we are addressing in New York, and we welcome your help. So, and I do want to let you know, our next forum is going to be on April 6th. Go ahead and sign up for that. What we're going to do at that forum is do an overview of the problems with voting machines. We know that there's always questions about, what about this voting machine, and what about this voting machine, and does this one good for risk limiting audits, and what about voters with disabilities? What are the options for them? And what is this shared paper path thing that you guys are always talking about? So we are going to do a real sort of lay it out nice and clean show on April 6th, and we really encourage you to sign up for that. So with that, we're going to just move right along here. I know we had a lot of comments that people are having trouble finding an affordable copy of Dr. Campbell's book. So we're going to have him back now, and hopefully he's going to be able to help us to figure out what is the easiest, the simplest way for people to deliver the vote?
I think it's out of print. And I think that's why there might be, whatever you do, do not spend $600 on that book. Okay.
Give us $600 and we'll go find you a copy of that book. But
same here.
Probably a used copy, right? A used bookstore would probably be the best.
Right.
That's used and new. Yeah, I see one for like $113 used on Amazon. They ransoming it. I'll come clean and say I have thought recently about updating it and getting it back in there. And I'm just not sure I've got the wherewithal to get back into that coal mine, because it's kind of a dark spot. And trust me, the book that was there, I cut about 300 pages from. Wow. And you only have 4 years of the voting machines in it.
Yeah. And in fact, I was going to ask if I could, Lulu, because I don't know, is there one particular voting machine that is used more than any other today, say in New York? Because here in Kentucky, we've got some voting machines that people just can't figure out. They are so convoluted.
Right. There's really kind of a few main types of voting machines, and I'll encourage you to come and attend our April 6th forum. But there's scanners, which generally use hand-marked paper ballots. Those are the types of voting machines that security experts recommend. There are ballot marking devices, which are necessary for voters with disabilities. Security experts recommend that they are used really only for people who need them, because the ballot has to be generated by the computer. And there's something that's called an all-in-one or a hybrid voting machine that combines those two in one unit. Those are machines that in general security experts are very, very concerned about, because they often combine a printer and a scanner in the same voting machine. And basically what you have there, when you have the printer and you have the scanner, the way I like to explain this is it's like a self-driving car. By the time the car can start itself, steer, stop, fill up with gas, it doesn't need you anymore. It can go wherever it wants. And a voting machine that can print and scan and tabulate, it doesn't need you anymore. It can do whatever it wants. So the hybrids are a particular concern. But we're gonna definitely roll over all of that on April 6th. I want to make sure that we take full advantage of you while you're here. So I want to talk about HR 1 that did come up, and some of the HR 1 is an omnibus, a huge kind of massive election reform bill. It's 800 pages long, and it has many, many provisions in it. We had a whole forum. We've had actually 3 forums on HR 1, so I encourage people to go back and watch those if you have questions about it. But one of them that we talked about was racial equity, and how the bill goes a long way to trying to address some of these issues that we've talked about here in this episode, of just the massive disenfranchisement and violence against Blacks in particular in this country, and many people of color. And so there's provisions in HR 1 to make it much easier to vote, make sure that it's easier to register, it's easier to vote absentee, it's easier to vote early. There's a mandatory period of early voting. And I want to specifically touch on the absentee ballot provisions of that, because absentee ballot voting is something that in your book, Dr. Campbell, you really talk about some of the problems with it. And I'm going to read a couple quotes again that are from your book. These are quick quotes about absentee ballot fraud. There was one instance, this was a election just before 2000 in Miami, where that was determined to be a great deal of absentee fraud. And when they actually, somebody was arrested there, this person named Rusi, and let's see if I can pull this up. I need to, no, don't want to do that. I need to, it's hard for me to talk and share my screen at the same time. But I have these quotes ready. So when they went to Rusi's home, I think you're seeing this now. Yeah. They discovered more than 100 absentee ballots and 50 blank applications for even more absentee ballots. So this was just basically like a mill to just really produce as many votes as possible for the candidate, like an actual factory. And then, Dr. Campbell, you many times within the book, you have concerns about absentee ballots and how easily they can be manipulated. And you say straight up mail-in votes provide an easy target for vote buyers. And yet we have in HR 1 a number of provisions. Here's one of the provisions from HR 1. The state may not impose any additional conditions or requirements on the individual to cast the vote by absentee ballot. So basically anyone can vote by mail. Also, there is no identification requirement in order to vote by mail. Nothing except a signature. No identification is allowed to be required, and no witness signature or notarization on those absentee ballots. So that's going to make it much, much easier for people to vote by mail. But do you have concerns about, the potential for fraud there?
Well, if I put on my Politico hat and start thinking, how can I manipulate the system? That would be pretty low-hanging fruit. Mm-hmm. And in Kentucky, I know there are stories of what we call ballot harvesting. I don't know if you're familiar with that phrase, but you can go to a nursing home and harvest hundreds and hundreds of these ballots, put them in the mail, and they're good to go. And I know you've worked with Andrew Appel and a number of other people who know 1,000 times more about this than I do. I'm a historian just trying to figure out what's happened in the past to provide context which is the wider view of how this has played out over time. But the central problem is trying to provide transparency while also protecting anonymity in a secret ballot. And I don't have, the 5 points process that can solve all this. I'm glad I'm not one of the authors of HR 1. And I imagine you guys are as well, but it's just that I guess after taking off my naive hat and getting involved in this for about a decade and interviewing and reading all of this stuff, I just kind of think, how can the system be gamed? And maybe not for a presidential election, something that big, but for a county commission race, say in Memphis, where I don't have to worry about that many votes. Can I harvest enough votes that way? But there are people who also have trouble getting to the polls. With a pandemic, boy, that put stress on a system and trying to vote in person. So that's why I've got to defer to people who are in the process, within the weeds of understanding how machines work today, because I'm learning from you guys more than anything.
Right. And I think the machines is somewhat of a different question. I think you really do have some expertise here. And when you say that it is low hanging fruit, I think that's a term that we're all familiar with. That means that this is something that is ripe for abuse. And is this something that maybe we want to think about in HR 1? I know we do have comments coming in the chat. I think
Roman's got a good one.
Yeah, ballot harvesting allowed by HR 1. Now, I will say that people who support the collection of mail-in ballots do not call it ballot harvesting, and in fact feel that that's a pejorative term.
Oh, it is.
So, yeah. So, and one of the things that I learned just from my participation in other communities is that there are communities like the indigenous community that very much needs for ballots to be collected communally, because there is not the transportation to the post office. There are not even addresses, and that's part of their culture. So is this something that we need to put more constraints on, though, that it is specifically designed for certain communities? So I think that's something. We have a lot of comments coming up in here in the chat. We have a question here. HR 1 and HR 4 will not pass. Here, let's, I think we can put this one up and see if Dr. Campbell, you want to address this. They will not pass until the filibuster is reformed. And we've been talking about HR 1. HR 4 is the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, also another big piece of legislation to address these issues. Please share your thoughts on this, the reforming the filibuster.
Oh, that's a whole different show. I mean, my goodness. You guys are like my PhD quals.
We're making you work for your money.
I know, right?
You said I could sell books for $600 a pop, Lulu, before we went on the air. I trusted you. Look.
Well, you're worth it. We'll try to get that money, but you see, we're having trouble fundraising as is, so we're paying you in kindness and admiration. 20
seconds. Let me also just say, when I mean ballot harvesting, I'm talking about someone who has malice aforethought, who is not interested in getting free and fair votes, who is interested in manipulating votes. Okay, so I'm not there to get the valid votes of people. I'm there to create them. Okay.
And we've seen both sides do this. We have to say that. In North Carolina, the Republicans were convicted of doing this. And in Miami, the Democrats were convicted of doing this. We know that both sides will do. This is the thing, and I really want to make sure that we leave time to talk about this reform. Reform is done when it benefits who's in power.
Right.
And those are the reforms that get passed, are the ones that actually benefit whoever is in power. So we have a question on the table about the filibuster, and then I want to circle back to that question of reform.
I think to me, there are two big issues. One would be the filibuster, and one's the Electoral College. I think the filibuster might have a chance of passing soon. It seems like there is some momentum there. My own Senator Mitch McConnell is threatening what he calls the scorched earth if that happens.
When you say passing, you mean a chance of being adapted, being modified. Right, okay.
I don't think the Electoral College is ever going to be touched as it is right now. It had to be a constitutional amendment. But The filibuster is a different issue. It's been used primarily, from what I have read, I'm not an expert on it, to mainly keep minority rights in check, to keep bills that would easily be passed under other circumstances through. I know people who work in the Senate Historical Office who talk about some of the benefits of this, that it is a rule that allows each senator some kind of autonomy and power. But whether it's that, the Electoral College, absentee ballots, what we're having is a fundamental discussion about the vitality and the longevity of a democratic system. And I think we learn from each other. I don't have the answers for you. If it were up to me, I wouldn't have a filibuster, but it's not up to me.
But that's interesting. It's something that you feel like really has been, to a certain extent, used to hold people of color back. And it sounds like you would not be sorry to see it modified. I think
I wouldn't, but I also know about unintended consequences.
It's a good tool, but it's an overused tool.
Yeah. And I know there might be circumstances where I wish someone could filibuster this thing, because but
it happened with the Supreme Court nomination.
So where would I stand? If it's up to me, I would change a lot of things, but it's not up to me, so I don't know.
But we value your opinion, and this is really interesting. I want to just talk about reform, and about how the reforms that get passed are the reforms that benefit the party that's in power. And I think one of the key things that you see, I'm going to bring up the secret ballot, which is something that has received a lot of praise. It's something that in general is considered to have really improved the security of our elections, because it made it so that vote buying was harder to do.
Right.
Your point was that vote buying went on anyway, and that one of the things that the secret ballot did was that it allowed the main parties to keep third parties off the ballot. And the reason why the main parties were so eager to embrace it, even though it was a reform, was because it benefited them by allowing them to basically eliminate their competition on the left or the right, their third party competition. So this is when we have this situation, reforms get passed that benefit those in power. What do we do? What is our recourse?
Well, that's why I was a little hesitating. So I guess you would call me the anti-filibuster person, but I also know that reforms have unintended consequences. When I was doing this book, I came across 12 bound volumes of depositions from people in 1905 in Louisville, talking about what was being done to the elections in that town. What was the first municipality to adopt the secret ballot to try and cleanse its elections 20 years before that? Louisville. And so their elections actually got even worse because of the secret ballot. So as a historian, I always think about contingency. I think about well-intentioned plans, and I also think about reforms that can backfire. And particularly when you have powerful people saying, "I'm ready for it to backfire," I'm ready. I'd like to see what the lay of the land looks like. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I have a question for it. Like, there are a lot of strategic reforms that are happening right now. Let me single out Tennessee. They are trying to get rid of early voting. And they are trying to get rid of primaries. And it is very significant political strategy here. If in Shelby County, they're only trying to do it, there are 95 counties, and I think they're only trying to do it in 2 counties. And it's the 2 largest Democrat counties in a red state. And basically what will happen is you will eliminate the Democrats from eliminating their candidate in a majority town, and then you'll just have a pool of candidates in a general election where the Republicans can just send one candidate and walk down the middle. So there are a lot of strategic things that are happening. They want to do a lot of this, and I don't think it has passed. I think it's come out of committee. So I'm relatively certain that thing may just pass, but they are doing things that are counter to HR1, because if they're eliminating early voting, and in the last election, Democrats voted 80% to 20% in the early voting period.
Right. And this is the thing, is that the Republicans, where they're in power, they are making changes that benefit them. The Democrats are in power at the federal level right now, trying as fast as they can to make changes to the process that's going to affect them. I want to just, we have 1 minute left, and just roll very briefly over electronic voting equipment. I know that you said multiple times it's not your expertise, but I think it is very clear from the book that you understood that any of the intentions that people had to change elections didn't just go away
disappear,
and vanish when we started voting on electronic voting.
Computers did not solve that problem.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah, in fact, the patent for the first voting machine was called the perfected voting machine, that it would take care of everything. There's an article in the New York Times that all of our worries are going to be taken care of with this new complicated machine that can record your vote without anyone knowing about it. And you hit a button and it all goes back to the the machines I remember when I was a kid. I got to look at when I was a little boy. If we've got about 20 seconds, I was a little boy in the first grade. We had a fake election for 1968. And the teacher said, "How many of you want to vote for Nixon?" And people raised their hands. "How many of you want to vote for Humphrey?" They raised their hands. And I said, "I didn't get to vote." She said, "Why not?" I said, "I want to vote for George Wallace." And I remember she looked at me like, what's wrong with you? Well, that's who the people in my neighborhood said would protect us. That he was the only one who was standing up for white values. And I remember the look on my teacher's face in casting my first vote was, boy, where did you come from? So I hope somehow this book, if she ever got a chance to read that I didn't turn out as badly as you think I would. I hope she's not spending $600 on it. That's what I'm saying.
Checkmate. She should.
What an anecdote to go out on. Well, you've certainly come a long way since then, Dr. Campbell.
Thanks for having me.
It has been a delight to have you here. We will really try to get some information to people about how to get a hold of your book for less than $600. And we were even thinking of asking you to do autographed copies, maybe if
absolutely, I'd be delighted.
Put you on the spot there. But it's really, really great to be in touch with you. And as you can tell, I don't know if you've been able to watch any of the chat, but people have just been fascinated and very, very actively participating here. And we're delighted that we're just great to have all these comments. Please do come back. We're going to say goodnight to Dr. Campbell. And it's a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. Both of you is terrific.
Yeah, we're going to do it again.
What a great guest.
Oh man, he's got some real content.
Yeah, that was really delightful. So we're just going to encourage you to come back and join us. The next forum is, as we said, it's the April 6th forum. And Benny, you want to give folks some information?
Yeah, take a look at the past episodes. It's a lot of information. Again, we got so many domain experts that's giving such rich content. It's something to really prepare yourself for, to understand about elections. We try to keep it coming, and Lulu just finds, one after another. What's up, Emily? Emily texts me. So we definitely want you guys to watch those episodes.
All right. So come back and join us on April 6th. Make sure to sign up. All of those links are down below in the YouTube, on the YouTube link. You can get all those links to sign up and share all of the information. So just remember, this is actually what democracy looks like. We'll see you soon.
Good night, everybody.